Hello, YouTubers. Welcome to PDINA'S. Really teachable moments. This is going to be a really fun topic. But first I want to mention, I do know that there's this story out about Archwell and this whole corruption around these French investigators. I'm going to talk about that. I'm certainly going to talk about it. But for now, I want to talk about something else. I want to talk about how Americans sees royalty in general. This dog. Okay, this is something that I think is a good topic to talk about, because there's this whole idea and conception around royal life and who royals are and who was the queen and what's this whole coronation thing about. Like, what is this from an American perspective? Okay. And I just want to run down some things, give you some really interesting information to have those friends of mine across the pond or whoever, even us Americans understand, generally how we see royalty. Okay. So our history here in the States is we look at being a king and having a king as not a good thing. I mean, if you really want to look at it in context to American history, our whole democracy and being an American and what we have become is really the antithesis of our whole way of governing, because we were ruled by the King George. And during that time, the things that were being discussed over in Parliament, over in the United Kingdom, they were dictating the things that the colonies would do here in the States. So we had no real representation for the things that were being decided upon over in Parliament in the United Kingdom, right? And so here in the States, and I know the rulership of royalty is completely different now than it was then. Of course, the king had much more power during this time. And now it's more of a figurehead. It's very symbolic. It's tradition. It's all these things that it didn't used to be. The whole idea around royalty has really formed who we are as Americans. And so when we see these things about royalty and we see the queen in her castles and with her jewelry and now, of course, King Charles, we see it, but a lot of Americans don't really understand it. They don't understand the amount of charity and the amount of giving back and attention brought to charities. Like, that whole concept is very foreign to we Americans. We just don't really see that up close the way you do over in the Commonwealth and in Great Britain. In America, we just see the glamour of it all, and we look at them as celebrities, which I was quickly taught by my watchers, subscribers of my channel, that they're not celebrities, because our mindset is that they're famous people. They sit in their castles and they just go around to these parties and these movie premieres and they do things completely different than we do here. Now, of course, I'm not talking about the Americans who are very well versed in international relations and those that understand how the governments really work over in the United Kingdom and abroad. I'm talking about just your average everyday American who's going to work, he's paying his bills, he's not really looking into what they do over there in those foreign countries. Like, they don't pay attention, they just see it come up on the news. Oh, that's the Queen, oh, that's King Charles, those are the people I'm talking about. And that is essentially, you could almost say, like a typical type of American that is just concerned about what's going on in this country. We're just paying attention to what we Americans is doing, like what we doing here in this country. Generally, Americans are not seeing and understanding the work, the monthly schedules of those that are in royal life, all the work that they do, bringing attention to different charities and their whole conglomerate of charity foundations that they are a part of, that they sit on these boards, or I guess you would consider that they oversee these different foundations, or they are a part of them. They attach themselves to these good works, and how it's about giving service and giving back. It's such a different way of doing things here in America than how it's done over in England with royalty. And that's what is so fascinating and different, because in reality, we as Americans, the only time we really are experiencing anything around royalty in our everyday lives, or when we go see a Disney movie. We see Cinderella. She got her prince, she got her castle, and she's going to the ball, and all these things that are very glamorous and high society and very fairy tale and fantasy. And it's not really understanding how it really functions, the everyday work and life of someone that is a part of the royal family. And I think part of that I had to do with Meghan Markle not really understanding what her role is, or maybe understanding it because she did study international relations, which even her whole degree around her studies was not a degree that was recognized by the college that she went to. But my general point is that international relations is something that she should have understood and known more about than the average American. Okay. But a lot of times there was a lot of talk around her not even understanding the real role of royals. So, and that's why I thought I'd talk about this, because there are actually states in America that are named after royalty. And that, I think, is some really good history for us as Americans to understand, that our states are named after things over in Great Britain from royalty. So looking at the states of North and South Carolina. North and South Carolina, they have a long and complicated history. 2 of the 13 colonies that began as a single colony but were divided shortly afterwards because it was too much land to govern. The name Carolina is often attributed as in honor of King Charles I of England. Now, the other one is Georgia, was inspired by a British king. Georgia was one of the original 13 colonies that became the United States. It was the last colony that was established. It became official in 1732. Now, another state, can you guess the other state? Louisiana. Yes, Louisiana. So in 1671, a French explorer actually claimed a large part of North America, and he named it in honor of King Louis XIV. And I think that's one of the things that we learned a lot about, actually, is how Louisiana comes from the French, because we have the Mardi Gras, very much French recognition, and culture is symbolized heavily in that state. And that's one of the things that we did learn about. So I wanted to go towards the things that aren't as common to maybe some of us here in the States about the naming of some of our states after royalty. Now, the other one, Maryland, was actually named after a British queen. Maryland has association with King Charles I, and it was named actually after his wife. Virginia's were named after the Virgin Queen. Virginia, subsequently West Virginia, was settled by Sir Walter Raleigh in 1584. He named this new land after the English monarch of the time, Queen Elizabeth I. I just wanted to talk briefly about Americans and how we see royalty, the average American. I know there's a lot of Americans that are like, what are you talking about, woman? I know these things. I'm just telling you, the people that I am around, the students that I see, there's just not a lot of knowledge, a lot of information for us to even know, well, what is this whole royal thing about? Like, what does that mean? What do they do? What is the purpose? And that's why you get this, I think, why it's so easy for Meghan to try to pull the wool over people's eyes, essentially, that are in America, because they're not going to really understand and know all these things that are happening around royal protocols and the controversy around the things that she would do. Like, people just weren't paying attention. They just, I mean, she could be a rebel, do things against the House of Windsor, and it can make news. But is the average American really going to understand what the big fuss is? Are they going to really know that she was being just difficult? Or are they just going to be like, just not paying attention? And I would think the latter. They just weren't really paying attention. And that's something that I think she could have even calculated or tried to assume would happen. And apparently coronation robes are going to be banned by King Charles. During the ceremony, they have these robes that they wore, at least they did when Queen Elizabeth was crowned, and he's banning them. He's like, no more robes. He's like, nope, we're not doing it. Not wearing the robes. So usually what these robes represent is your British peerage. It denotes your ranking within the British peerage and dates back to the 15th century before they were standardized in the 17th century. But Charles, with advice from the government, taking into consideration the cost of living crisis right now, wants people come without their robes. And also it's being reported that Prince Harry is going to have to be at least 700 feet away from William. Yes, like they're even calculating how much distance the brothers need to have amongst themselves. It's crazy. It has come to a point now where you just look at what has happened to this family, how it's been torn apart. And you can only amount this all up to one woman's ambition to have fame and celebrity. She's torn away from her own family, and she has managed to now have her own husband torn away from his family. It's quite tragic. It's really sad. And especially on one of the most important days of King Charles's life. His sons are estranged from each other. And it's the cause of a woman and her desires to be so just divisive. You cannot see it any other way. She's done it to her own. She's now doing it and has done it to her husband's family. It's really sad. I mean, you think about what happened during the Queen's last years of her reign and how terrible it was to have all this controversy, and with her husband Philip passing away, seeing that interview with Oprah, what Meghan has managed to do during the historical lifetime of Queen Elizabeth, and now going into the reign of King Charles, and how she has managed to even make things even worse for Harry and William during one of the most, or I would even say the most important day of King Charles's life. Is Meghan is now, her influence, what she has done has caused a huge divide on the king's most important day of his life. And she's come into something as an American, not really knowing anything about the traditions, and she's managed to cause just a lot of ugliness into something very historic, very different from what we do as Americans. She's managed to bring her nasty, divisive, controversial, non-tradition following ugliness into a foreign country and stomp on their traditions and culture and ways of doing something that is very intertwined into the fabric of this country. And she's managed to do something that is appallingly egregious. And I am embarrassed as an American that she would be the one to be behind this. And the only way you can look at it is things were fine before she came. There were no issues. There were no problems with William and Harry. When they married and became husband and wife, and we saw from the very beginning the behavior of Meghan, how she was going against the traditions and protocols with just the simple things within the royal household. Just didn't want to do the basics. She wanted there to be a problem. She wanted to create a controversy that would get her out of living as a royal. And what did she manage to do? She's managed to take it into the fabric, culture, tradition of the monarchy, with the reign of the Queen in her last years, and now going into the reign of King Charles. This woman has managed to do something that's put an ugly stain on something that should be very educational and historic and following in the line of its traditions. And you have this whole mess that this American woman has caused. And a lot of people don't see it. They don't see it because they don't want to see it. Whether you are for the monarchy or if you're not for the monarchy, the fact is this woman has managed to do something that is, in my opinion, very wrong on a huge level. It's just so tragic what has happened now to the families, that there has to be this big divide now on something that should just be about learning and history and following in line of things that have been done hundreds of years prior. And it's unbelievable. But hey, what can you do? But just see that this had a beginning. It started with somebody, with someone. And the common denominator and factor in all of this is when that woman, Meghan Markle, married into the House of Windsor. Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.